So these are the Totem Bison Twin Towers, one of the newest speakers from Totem. And it may look like an ordinary slim loudspeaker you see out there, but let me tell you, there is absolutely nothing ordinary about these guys. There's some unique stuff done to this speaker that absolutely blew my mind. And I'm gonna share with you my experiences with these speakers and what actually blew my mind about these. But first, let's go back to when I first received them. First, unboxing the Totem Bison Twin Towers, I thought these speakers could be the real deal if the stated specs on the Totem's websites were true. After all, who wouldn't want a speaker that truly hits 31 Hz at f3 in a slim cabinet? That's subwoofer territory right there, but how are they achieving that with just two 5.25-inch woofers and two ports in such a slim cabinet? Well, you know what they say, you have to hear it to believe it. Setting up these speakers was super simple and straightforward. After playing around with toe-in and distance from the walls, I settled around 3.5 feet from the back wall to the front baffle of the Bison Twin Towers. That seemed to be the most optimal setup in my room. It still sounded great with controlled bass even at about 2.5 feet, but I preferred the imaging and sound staging that these speakers provided in spades when I gave them a foot more to work with. I also tried them at 1.5 feet, but that started to sound a little bit boomy and out of control in my room. Well, while setting up these speakers, even before getting them to their optimal position, I immediately noticed three things. So first and foremost, I love these loudspeakers. My initial impressions are obviously very, very positive. And what I've noticed, the first thing that I noticed is that the soundstage is massive. Both the width and the depth on these speakers, incredible. Very spacious, but more than that, these days I've been kind of appreciating more the imaging capability in my loudspeakers, which is the depiction of where the instruments and the singers are located within the soundstage given. And these are very precise, it's very clear to me with these speakers. And on top of that, the separation I find is incredible. I just actually played a metal track, so I've been to Sleep Token concerts lately, and when I was playing some Sleep Token on my system, I noticed how distinctive the instruments were separated, nothing seemed crowded, which is a hard task. I find that with a lot of speakers that I play in my system, with metal, especially with metal, it sounds often crowded. These didn't get crowded, so I was very surprised by that. Second thing I noticed is that these have overall a warm tone so far, which I absolutely love. They have this inviting, luscious, very full sounding mid-range so far. So I've been really enjoying some vocal tracks as well. The third thing that I noticed is that this speaker seems to be actually hitting 30 Hz or even lower. I'm feeling a lot of sub bass out of these speakers with great authority too. So I don't know how they're doing that with two 5.25-inch woofers and in such a slim cabinet, but I'm gonna make sure that I measure these speakers so that in my room, so that I'm not hallucinating that it's actually hitting that low. But yeah, these have some incredible bass and texture so far, and I'm baffled by that. I have to confess, I am a Totem speaker fanboy. After having reviewed both their Totem Tribe Towers and the Metal version 2 loudspeakers, I couldn't help myself but fall for the Totem's house sound charm. To refresh your memory, this driver technology eliminates the need for a crossover. Because it behaves by itself, and because of that, the tone on those speakers sounded just so right and pure to me. What I really love about Totem speakers in general has to do with their form factor. It's slim and made to not take up too much space so that they can even fit into small apartment spaces, but they really haven't left out the dynamics, especially when it comes to their speakers that utilize their torrent driver technology. However, the Totem Bison lineup does not utilize this driver technology, but rather uses two 5.25-inch paper woofers. Compared to the Totem Tribe Towers or the Metal version 2 with torrent drivers, the Bison Twin Towers didn't sound as transient, fast, or transparent to me. In fact, it possessed almost the opposite charm, with a warmer tone that led to a more meaty, fuller sounding mid-range, and muscular, powerful bass, especially in the sub-bass region. Listening to the Totem Bison Twin Towers, it almost comes as a shock every time I hear these small towers dig low in the sub-bass region with authority as if they were 3 times their size. In fact, previous to setting up the Bison Twin Towers, I had set up the Crescendo Mark II loudspeakers from Zen Acoustics. And coming from a bass monster with 2 8-inch woofers married to a transmission line cabinet, I was keeping my expectations in check when it comes to sheer dynamics that these smaller towers can provide. But much to my surprise, while these small towers with 5.25-inch woofers did not have the same amount of pressure and air that was felt with the more bigger speaker, I felt that the bass amount was actually about the same. As you can see, the quasi-anechoic response shows an amazing bass extension easily hitting the stated F3 or the -3 decibel point of 31 Hz. We will come back to talk about this little peak right here in the later part of this video. Unlike the in-room response shown earlier, you do not see dips created by my room because this is a snapshot of the speaker's frequency without the room reflections through a measurement technique that I did that we won't be getting into in this video. For now, just know that this is the graph that shows a snapshot of the speaker's frequency graph, which indicates that the bass extension indeed does go deep into the stated 31 Hz region at the -3 decibel point, and that this graph shows what they look like in my room with all the reflections. And outside of the dips created by my room, it actually extends down even further than the stated 31 Hz, with somewhat usable range down in the 20s. Not an easy task for a slim tower to truly hit these low frequencies, so I am definitely super impressed. Now, as much as I'm impressed with the overall dynamics of these loudspeakers, what really impresses me even more, and really the highlight of the show for me, has to be the mid-range. The mid-range has this, the right amount of bloom and this full-bodied, full-sounding musical presentation that literally puts me into an emotional coma every single time I listen to these loudspeakers. And part of that emotional engagement is not only that it's warm and luscious, but it's also great at separation within the soundstage and really, really good clarity in the high frequencies and in the mid-range, despite the fact that it's like warm and luscious type of sound. And I believe the tweeter has a lot to do with that. And the reason I say that is because this tweeter is a 1.3-inch soft dome tweeter, which is a slightly bigger tweeter than the traditional 1-inch soft dome tweeter you will often see in the market today. And along with this intentionally small waveguide on the tweeter, this tweeter is able to cross to these woofers at 2.5 kilohertz, which is relatively low. And that's well into the mid-range frequency. And when it comes to those higher cycles, the tweeter is just going to be better at handling with lower distortion and better depiction than a mid-woofer can. And that's why I'm led to believe the part of the clarity that I'm hearing on these loudspeakers has a lot to do with the tweeter handling the upper range of that mid-range, which is the higher cycles of the mid-range frequency. And overall, I love the fact that I can crank these speakers really loud, even with metal, with great separation and clarity because of that. Plus, I love the fact that the soundstage is wide and deep on this loudspeaker. If it was just a warm, luscious sound, it wouldn't be as impressive, but the soundstage is wide and deep, and within that large, gigantic soundstage, the separation and the clarity is really, really amazing. And that's what makes this speaker so fun to listen to and so musical to listen to, in my opinion. After taking a look at these speakers in person, it comes to me as no surprise that these have amazing soundstage. From my experience, this is an inherent advantage to a slim loudspeaker form factor. Slim speakers like these tend to throw a larger soundstage and generally have better spatial cues than larger loudspeakers. For example, like the Orendo 1723 THX loudspeakers I loved so much. These had dynamics out the wazoo, and also did create more pressure and air from bigger woofers and a bigger cabinet. But the Bison Twin Towers does take the lead in terms of soundstage, again largely by design and form factor. Plus, these speakers have rounded corners both on the side and the top to help with diffraction of the baffle's edges and corners. From my experience, this definitely helps with focus and exactness of the imagery, but also the depth and the width of the soundstage itself. And of course, it is great to see that Totem has flush mounted their drivers so that there is no protruding driver edges that can also cause diffraction issues. All of this makes the speaker one of the best soundstage, imagery, and separation I've heard in a slim speaker design at this price point. I feel that this amazing soundstage and spatial capabilities of the Bison Twin Towers are only bested by the likes of mini monitors like the Monocoustic Supermon Mini or the Rosa Ferentino Sotaldo loudspeakers that cost more than double. Listening to the Totem Bison Twin Towers with multiple amplifiers was easy, and it sounded good with virtually every single amplifier I have tried. With a sensitivity of 90 dB at 1 meter, it was easy to get these to cranking loud volumes with any amplifier I have tried, and man do they sound clean and composed even at cranking levels. They simply never got bright, probably once again partially due to that slightly recessed upper mid and lower treble tuning, but that's not all there's to it in my opinion. I've personally heard similar tunings with totally different results in the past, and it might be obvious to some, but it must be stated that the tweeter itself deserves a thumbs up here in being as refined as it is and keeping sound composed and smooth without brittleness even at cranking loud volumes. Again, not an easy task for any speaker. Honestly, these seemed like almost textbook's definition of a really good loudspeaker design. Of course, except for that rather sharp rise around 175 Hz that we saw. That's not textbook. But we will see if this is actually a problem. You might be surprised to find that this was not only intentional, but a vital part of the design itself. The peak at the 175 Hz also matches up to the little impedance dip at the same frequency and does show as resonance through the waterfall graph in the same region. But notice how everything else is super clean and textbook. The real question is if this resonance is audible. Firstly, as most measurement gurus may suspect, it is audible, and it would be weird if it wasn't with a near 10 dB peak. This is easily testable by putting through an isolated test tone at 175 Hz. By doing this, you can hear the difference in volume and how it gets louder at the peak frequency as the cabinet vibrates more than any of the adjacent frequencies. However, during my subjective listening sessions, I did not notice any obvious peaks, and as you can see, once you put the Bison Twin Towers into my room, that peak at 175 Hz is there still, but it doesn't look so out of place as it did on the quasi-anechoic response. In fact, it lines up with what Vince, the chief designer at Totem, had to say about the peak. Yes, it is correct to call it a resonance, but it was not only intentional but vital to the overall tuning of the Totem Bison Twin Towers. That peak around 175 Hz not only adds to the warmth of the speakers, but is a critical part that integrates the mid-range to the bass in the room. Without it, it results in a hole in the sound, and it did not sound right in our listening tests. And he's right, at least in my room. If that 175 Hz peak wasn't there, it would create a big hole between the mid-range and the bass. Upon suppressing that region with an EQ using a sharp Q, it sounded hollow and disconnected from the mids to the bass. It seems to me that the 175 Hz resonance that could have been easily dismissed as a terrible design mistake by most is actually a conscientious design choice based on in-room response and what they would sound like in a real room. Vince was very transparent with me and also discussed the fact that the Totem Bison Twin Towers do not utilize traditional damping materials. Instead, they coat the inner side of the cabinet with this white material you see called borosilicate paint, which is a material known to have excellent thermal resistance and is even used by NASA. Vince stated 3 main reasons for using this material opposed to traditional absorption-based cabinet damping materials. 1. To free up space inside the cabinet of the damping material and thus create max cabinet volume so that the speakers can truly hit as low as they can despite their small form factor. 2. Borosilicate offers excellent thermal capabilities. While traditional damping material can degrade over time depending on change in temperature and change in their parameters and therefore their overall sound, our speakers are made so that it is exactly as I tuned it without degradation for generations, if not forever. 3. Use of this material keeps the speaker alive and not dead sounding and is a vital part of the tuning of these loudspeakers. I know that despite this, people will have mixed reactions to any design that doesn't follow textbook speaker design approaches. At the end of the day, if you are someone that finds nothing else is acceptable but a flat frequency response with no resonance whatsoever, then this explanation might still sound bogus to you and you might not agree with his methods. However, there is no mistaking that designing a big speaker to sound big is a lot easier than making a small speaker sound big. And different approaches may be required, as it is almost certain that we won't be getting the same amount of bass extension and dynamics from the same form factor on the speaker using textbook approaches. Also, there's no mistaking that the cabinet is well behaved for not having any damping materials inside. And that was by no mere coincidence. Vince explained to me that he had spent the last better of 3 years developing the speaker, in which a lot of the time was spent finally tuning the cabinet, as even slight deviations in the cabinet dimensions resulted in tonal changes and different resonances that he did not want. As it is with finely tuned instruments, he carefully tuned his cabinet. Vince pointed out that this is a much harder way to do it, but he does it because he simply isn't satisfied with damping his speakers the traditional way that to him results in a rather dead sounding speaker. And listen, I'm not here to convince you of anything. I'm just here to explain to you my experience with these speakers, and despite all the other explanations, if that resonance being there bothers you, then it bothers you, and that's perfectly fine. But personally for me, I would choose these speakers over any flat frequency, low distortion, no resonance speakers I have seen for my personal entertainment space. Not saying those things are not important, those things are very important. In fact, I use a speaker upstairs, my studio monitors, for mix and mastering and making this video and stuff like that, for precision. But in my entertainment space, I'm not doing it for precision. I don't enjoy the precise sound. For me, it's about the musicality. It's about how engaging it is emotionally for me. And these speakers really do it for me versus any flat frequency or studio monitors I have set up in my space. These speakers have the musicality, it has the soundstage, it has the imagery depiction that engages me emotionally, and subjectively, I prefer these speakers very much in my listening space, and I just absolutely fell in love with them. And even more so because these are easy to drive in terms of getting the volume up there, even with a receiver. And to my surprise, they sound really, really good even with the receiver that I had just lying around. But these are a 4-ohm speaker, and they do go even below 4 ohms at certain frequency. So it's probably a good idea to use it with quality amplification. And what I've personally found is that this speaker really does scale with better equipment, better amplification, that the more you give, the more the speaker gives back. And for me, without beating around the bush, the best amplifier, integrated amplifier actually, that I have tried is this. This is a new integrated amplifier that I'm reviewing right now, and just absolutely amazing bass, texture, mid-range, high frequency, everything I talked about in the video is just enhanced and taken to a different level. It's almost goosebumps, right? But I'm starting with what sounded the best to me, the best pairing, but this is a quite expensive investment, especially considering that it's like 3 times the price of the speakers. So I tried other amplifiers, especially the Galleon TSA75, and this is about $1,500 I believe. And I mean, for the money, it's an amazing pairing with these speakers. It contains the robust bass, it kind of augments that bass. And the mid-range and the high frequency and the soundstage, the stuff that I talked about in this video, it all is very much intact. It's not as good as the integrated amplifier that I thought was the best with these speakers, but honestly, for $1,500, I think the TSA75 from Galleon is just an amazing match with these speakers if you're on a budget. However, keep in mind that the TSA75 seemed to boost the bass a little bit on these loudspeakers. The TSA75 seemed to have really good bass, and married with a speaker that has good bass, it seems to bring it up a little bit. So if you're in a small room and you don't want any bass problems and you can't pull the speakers out, then it may not be the best choice. So for that, I have the AdCom. So when I was trying the AdCom, it's slightly more expensive at $1,800 or something like that. And the AdCom seems to be the most neutral presentation I've heard with these speakers. It gives everything that I talked about that these speakers are good at without exaggerating any of the frequencies from my experience. So for me, it was the most neutral presentation that I got out of these speakers, and I thought it was a great pairing overall. Now, honestly speaking, I've tried a lot of different amplifiers with these, but I'm nitpicking the ones that I feel like is the best synergy and gave me the most bang for the buck with those two. But obviously, I've tried it with my reference amplifiers, which was the NAT Transmitter Monoblocks, which I absolutely... When I hooked it up, it blew my mind. To me, that sounded like really wide, really deep, and these being 90 something dB loudspeakers, it got cranking loud really easily, and it was just great. I think the NAT is just crazy good, but it's also $30,000. So there's that. Next is the AGD Audience. And these are the monoblocks that I had before, but if you noticed, it's a little bit different now. And this is a little bit of a teaser, but these are special order. I got them finished in nice copper finish because I just love these amplifiers and I wanted to keep it as a reference. And I just wanted something that looked a little bit to my personal preference, I suppose. And I'm really digging the way they look right now. And I'm just in so much love with them. But in terms of sound, I think it gives the most kind of nuance and detail in the music. So if you listen to music at low volumes, I thought the Audience were the most detail retrieving without getting bright or brittle, just so much micro detail in the music and the soundstage. So the Audience, I think, is a great choice, and that's one of the reasons I want it as my reference, because it's such a good pairing with majority of the speakers I have tried with, and it's no exception with the Bison Twin Towers either. Robust bass, amazing mid-range textures, detail, again, that nuance factor is really what gets me. All the micro details, the sparkling everywhere within the soundstage, the imagery being perfect. So if you're more like a technicality guy, but also don't like shrill or brightness or brittleness, then the AGD Audience may be the perfect choice with the Bison Twin Towers. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this video and my journey with the Bison Twin Towers. If you enjoyed this video, please click that like button and subscribe. And please don't forget to share it with your friends as well. And I'll see you guys on my next journey. Until next time.